I'm sure that every one of us have a dream and an idea about what heaven's like. The Old Testament and Isaiah says it's going to be a banquet with great wine and juicy red meats. And you think, I can identify with that. Jesus talks about the end of the world and those who will be welcomed. I was hungry, you gave me to eat. And the banquet where all were fed, as he did with the multiplications and the loaves and the fish. But I truly believe, and a lot of us, all of us, we don't have to wait, if we're so blessed to get to heaven, to know what it's going to be like. So Jesus gives us an idea in these parables. But I remember a vision that I had, it wasn't too long ago. The day was June 4th, and maybe you remember it as well. I came here, Father Tom and I started high school together. We've been great friends for that many years. That's a long time ago. But he's a great friend. So I was invited to celebrate his 50th anniversary. He said, I'm not sure many people are going to come at 2 o'clock. I go, really, Tom? Really? So, of course, the church was full. So as we celebrated, and I looked out, and I'm sure he thought the same. I know what the kingdom of heaven is going to look like. These are people of faith. These are people who walk together in peace. These are people on a common mission. These are people of diversity. And these are people who love God and want to be with God. It wasn't hard to imagine. And God gives us these images to help us understand that his promises can come true in our life. But he has some ideas about his kingdom. We all know, we all have our own idea about what a house should look like, but God's got a different idea. So as an example, he says the kingdom of heaven is like a father who wanted to give a banquet for his son at his wedding. And he sent out all these invitations, and the servants came back and said, nobody accepted. They all have excuses. Now, we know what excuses are about. You didn't make an excuse. You came here today. Could have. So anyway, the father said, well, look, just go and invite everyone. Let them come. And so they did, and the banquet hall was filled, and the father was happy. Except he saw something. What did he see? What did he see? He said, I saw a person says, you didn't bring your wedding garment. And I'm thinking, Lord, these are poor people. They came off the streets. They can't afford a nice clothes. That isn't what he was talking about. He was talking about a person coming into his kingdom with an unforgiving heart. He's talking about a person who has hatred or anger, who excludes others, who's prejudiced, who doesn't associate or wouldn't associate with a person coming, say, from Syria, or an immigrant mother coming from El Salvador with her child to just provide safety, would say, I don't want to be with them. And Jesus says, you didn't wear your wedding garment. That's the wedding garment. So today we have these parables. And so we think about the parable of the sower and the seed and the weed. Well, he's talking to us. See, the wheat has been grown and nourished for our life. It comes the bread of life for us. But sometimes we are the weed. We bring the poison of our heart. And Jesus says to us, before we can enter the kingdom, we need to uproot the weeds. We know what that's like if you have a garden. The garden isn't beautiful with lots of weeds. And we have to look honestly in our own hearts about the weeds in our life. Not to look at the weeds and the downfall or the failings of others, but just in our own heart. And that's not easy. And then there's the parable of the mustard seed. Now, it's a real small seed, and it grows into a bush large enough to carry the birds of the sky. It doesn't say just cardinals. It doesn't say orioles. It doesn't say the most beautiful birds. It says all the birds. So you can imagine there's a beautiful cardinal, and this crow comes in next to it. They say, it doesn't look good. See, the Lord tells us about who's welcome to his kingdom, not what we think. So who's in these branches? It's the people of God that he calls. So you know what yesterday was? the Feast of Mary Magdalene. Now, there's a lot of confusion about this Mary Magdalene. We can associate this Mary Magdalene, maybe it's three different Marys, but they all seem to converge together. So Mary was, we sometimes think, and she was the woman who the Pharisees brought up and said, "Now, Lord, what are you going to do with her? She was caught in adultery. You must stone her." And he said, "Okay, but let the first man without sin throw the stone." Everybody walked away, as you and I would. So it's the same Mary, or at least we say, that there was this time before his Passover, he was at this banquet, and I don't know how she got there because women weren't welcome in those kinds of things, but she found her way in with this gorgeous gift of oil, very expensive. And she began to anoint his feet and his hair and wiped his feet with her hair and began to weep. And of course the Pharisee says, "Do you know who's touching you? That's the person next to us on the branch. You know who's touching you?" And he says, "Yes, I do. She's a sinner." And he says, "Yeah, I know that. But she's loved much, unlike you," he would say. "And because her many loves, her great love, her sins are forgiven." But also, who was Mary Magdalene? Think of this. And you think, well, Jesus has gone way too far. He's too lenient. Who was the first to discover the empty tomb? Who was the first to announce the good news that he had risen? It wasn't Peter, who denied him. It wasn't the other apostles who ran away. It was Mary Magdalene. She was the first disciple to announce the good news. So Jesus has a whole different idea about whom he's going to use, whom he's going to invite. And sometimes that doesn't fit our heart very well. So I have prejudices. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to overcome some of my prejudices, because I didn't see with the heart of God. I saw with my own eyes. You know, it took me a while. I never felt comfortable when I was young why black people were treated, African Americans were treated so terrible. It took me a while to understand. I didn't like it, but I didn't have the courage to do anything about it. I remember this young kid in our school. It was maybe in a good Catholic school, right? St. Joseph, Missouri. He was in our class, and the class ahead of us teased him every day at recess. And I watched. And how embarrassed I am. But I learned the lesson. It wasn't right. And the prejudice of my heart, there's no room in God's kingdom for that. So we have to think about our prejudices. You know, I have trouble, I have to say, and I shouldn't say it, but so people who, now I'm not going to say it. I'll just leave it alone. I have to deal with it myself. But you know who they are in your life. You know, and I do have trouble. You know, my father came from Syria, but now is Lebanon. And I pray every day, you know, if he came over when he was about 10, so you say 90 years ago, if he'd come over, he wouldn't be welcome today. He wouldn't be welcome. And all he wanted to do with his father, mother, and his brothers is just to have a life here. You know, and there are people who have trouble with that. I've been to El Salvador 25 times, and I've seen mothers and fathers hold their children just like this, and they've grown up when I've come back. And today, a young child, 15, 16, a boy, he didn't have a chance unless he leaves there, because he's required either to join a gang or get out. And that's what a mother's in field. And so when we make these statements, we don't have a clue. We don't have a clue about what we say, how it affects other people. And we have this, I think, this responsibility to educate ourselves. Who belongs to the kingdom of God? The only thing I can say is, I just hope I'm blessed enough that I can land on one of the branches. That's all I can say. And I can't say anything about anybody else. There's another image I'd like to bring. You know, the seed's about this big. Just about this big. Now, you talk about a seed, it grows up to be, just expands. Now, see, he's not here, so I can say this. Now, Tom Tank He starts with little ideas, right? And once he just get out of his way or get in line and follow me. He started that beautiful retreat camp for youth down in just a little bit south of here. I know that he did housing for Section 8 people. He just has no limits to his imagination. And the little seed that he plants becomes a branch. It becomes a kingdom of God here on earth. And the other thing I want to say, do you remember the young woman, Malaya, from Pakistan, the young girl? She was going to school, and they tried to kill her, assassinate her, killed her, shot her in the head, and she survived. And you know what she does with this little idea? She wants an education. It becomes that she wants an education for every young Muslim girl in the world, that they should have a chance. That little idea. And she survived, and I think for good reason, for God's reason, to make this beautiful idea of the kingdom a reality here on earth. So think of our lives and what we do to build the kingdom here on earth. And the branches that are sprouted in our life. Who are the people that want to be welcomed? And how do we answer their prayer?